Hello everybody, and welcome back to the RF1 build series. I greatly apologize for the lack of videos over the past couple of months, but some progress has finally started happening. Here's a quick sneak peek of that progress that is coming shortly, but in today's episode we're going to be tackling the engine bay, and we're also going to be installing the door and doing a couple modifications to that. So let's go ahead and get right to it. In today's episode, we're going to be starting with the engine bay. There's going to be a lot of fabrication work, as we're going to be doing something that's called shading the engine bay. This is always something I've wanted to do, as it gives a very clean appearance, and is commonly done whenever you're building a show car, or a car that is built to go specifically just to automotive shows, and to show off how clean the appearance is. I personally have always liked how this looks on the S2000, and while I was sitting in front of it one day, I simply thought to myself, why not? Now's the perfect time. So we're going to be starting off with this nice attachment that you simply put onto your drill. It is a flat type disc that is specifically made just to grind down paint and not metal. So as you can see, I'm using it here to grind down the various areas that we're going to be welding up and closing. And the quickest way to get those down to metal is by using this attachment on the drill. After getting everything down to metal, I went ahead and wiped it down with my favorite super clean spray bottle. And then we're going to start plugging up and welding some of these smaller holes all around the engine bay. We're going to continue our welding down the frame rail. I picked one side and continued to work my way down that one side, plugging up those holes that we just previously ground down to metal using that one tool I just showed you. After getting those all welded, we're going to start grinding everything down. I'm not going to be putting too much pressure here on the flat disc, as we're trying just to get it perfectly level with the sheet of metal that's already underneath it. So once you see it start kind of get flat, that's when you start to relieve the pressure on the flat disc itself so you don't dig too deep. Next, we're going to start making these plates. As you can see, I've started with cardboard, and we're going to be using these to cover up these bigger holes that we can't just simply shove our MIG gun in there and start welding. It looked way too messy. So I started with piece of cardboard and trimmed it up to the size that I wanted, and then I transferred that over to a sheet of sheet metal. If I remember correctly, I believe this was 22 gauge, nothing too thick. This is probably very similar to what the original gauge thickness was for the actual metal that was used for the car. We're simply just going to be cutting that metal out, and then we're going to be cleaning up all of the edges. And then we're going to be test fitting, and then we're probably going to be trimming some more, cleaning up some edges, test fitting, trimming some more, and repeat. Once I was finally happy with the finish, we'll go ahead and start tack welding this plate in. As you can see here, I'm going to start by tack welding one corner, and then moving all the way over to the other corner. The idea here is to help the heat move through the entire piece, and not just get caught in one section of this small thin piece of metal, as it'll quickly start to warp if we concentrate the heat on one section. So we're slowly going to be moving and tack welding until we're ultimately at the point where we have a strong weld all the way around. Once we're happy with the welds, we'll break out the angle grinder and start working down those welds so that way they're not a big lump. Next, we're going to start on the front frame rails. Previously, I attempted to plate these whenever I tried to make a chassis dolly to make moving the S2000 a little bit easier, but that catastrophically failed. So next, we're going to start working on these. We're going to clean these up and turn these into proper plates. I'm going to start by cutting away the excess metal that we no longer need. And it's with that, I want to introduce you to a new segment of this build series. It's called Cutting Metal and Zen. In today's busy world, I feel like the simple things in life sometimes get overlooked. And one of the simple things in life is being able to build things with your own two hands. And for some reason, that's very peaceful for me. And so there's nothing more that I love than to simply come home and work on my car, whether or not it be cutting and welding for hours on end like this. This, for whatever reason, is my zen. And I wanted to share that experience with you guys in today's fast-paced world and slow things down a little bit. So enjoy the rest of this montage. I'm going to keep it a little bit peaceful. I'll be back with you guys in a little bit. What we are working on here are plates to help cover up the rest of the engine bay. This will give a much more smooth appearance towards the back wheel well area going into the firewall here. As you can see, there's a lot of holes and divots and stuff, so the idea with this plate is to smooth all of that over with a clean plate that has no holes or anything in it. Now that I'm happy with the plate for this side of the frame rail, I'm going to go ahead and copy this over on another sheet of metal and get ready to make the plate for the other side. Pretty much the same process, just cut it out, keep trimming it up until it fits into place the way you want it. Here we're going through and we're doing the same thing as we did with the other plate previously on the firewall. We're going to be tack welding it, going corner by corner. Obviously with how big this panel is, we're going to separate our corners a lot, and we're going to try to even out how much heat we're putting into this panel so that way it doesn't warp too much. I will be honest with you guys, and I did actually end up warping these panels just a little bit. The nice thing is it's not really noticeable, but there is a little bit of a bulge and they're not perfectly flat anymore. Sometimes that just happens whenever you're working with thin metal like this. I may go back later on and fix that, but for the time being it looks good enough that I'm not too worried about it. Here's a quick tip. If you guys need to get rid of some of the glue in between some of your panels, just burn through it and set it on fire. It works. Now that the panels are fully welded into place, we're going to go ahead and start grinding them down with the angle grinder. Get ready to go through a lot of flat discs because at this point, you're going to be grinding a ton and your back's going to be hurting. But it's all worth it once it's done. Now we're going to go back and we're going to re-weld some of the spots that we previously ground down. The reason for this is because occasionally you'll find some air pockets inside of where you welded, and you want to go through and you want to fill those back up and then grind them back down so you get a smooth appearance. That's simply what we're doing here. Now we're going to move towards the front area of the frames again. We're on the other side of the shock tower. Here we're going to be plating this front section. Since I had to cut off a lot of the front of the car, obviously there's going to be a lot more work involved if you're working with a stock S2000. But I simply just need to add this one plate here, and then it'll give us a very clean appearance. Now with most of the engine bay plated, we're going to go through and we're going to delete some of the rest of the accessories that we don't want. This is one of the brackets that I won't be using, and then as you can see there's still a couple holes that we need to plate as well. So we're going to go through and finish all of that up. Here's a close-up look of how I'm trying to grind down the actual weld holes themselves. The idea is not to put too much pressure so that way you get a very even appearance like this. Here I'm going to continue plating more sections of the firewall. This one is a little bit troublesome as it required a little bit of assistance from my beautiful wife as she helped plate while I put a couple of tacks in. Using the same process, we were able to complete the plugs for the rest of the holes in the firewall.
Yeah, you did.
Now we're going to go through and we're going to grind down all of the holes that we just welded up. Now with all that work, you might think we're done with welding and grinding. Well, surprise, surprise, we're not. Because there's still some more spots I needed to touch up. That's what we're going to do here. I'm going to continue to weld and grind a couple more of those touch-up spots. Now that most of the engine bay is done, we're going to move into the wheel wells. One of the things I wanted to reinforce was the upper control arm mounts. It's a common issue with the early S2000s that whenever you're pulling extreme G-forces at the racetrack, the upper control arm mounts will start to separate from the frame rail. The best way to combat this is to actually weld the mounts themselves directly to the frame rail, and that's what we're doing here. I'm also going to go ahead and plate the upper control arm mounts as well to reinforce them. Just in case we get into any major incidents with the front wheels while drifting, I want these mounts not to move an inch. I want the arms themselves to bend and not the mounts.
And
now that I have most of the chassis set up the way I wanted, I decided it was time to start mounting most of the suspension parts. Here you can see I've got some subframe collars. These are used to help align the subframe so that way they do not shift and that it's perfectly centered whenever you're installing it onto the chassis. Here I've also ordered some brand new bolts for the subframe since this was a chassis we pulled out of the field. I didn't actually have any bolts for it and I wanted to use brand new bolts anyways. After installing the subframe, I moved to the actual control arms themselves. We're starting with the lower control arm, and here again I've got all brand new hardware to get this installed. After mounting the front control arms, it was at this point I knew I might have screwed up. I noticed that there was hardly any movement when going up with the control arm, and this was obviously going to limit how much actual movement the arms themselves had, and this was going to be a clear stopping point for my range of motion. So I whipped out my trusty angle grinder once again and got to work. Once I was happy with how much range of motion I had after clearancing the upper plates, I then moved on to unboxing the new shocks that I had acquired. These are actually not new, but these are used from LeasyParts.com. This is a well-known shop that will sell used parts from wrecked cars, and they have an awesome online category of S2000 parts, and so this is actually where I've been acquiring some of my used parts for this build. After installing the shocks, I then prepared everything I needed to install the knuckles. I first installed the lower ball joint, and then the angle kit. And I do want to make a note here, I accidentally put these angle kit pieces on backwards. Technically they should be flipped around 180 degrees. I realized that after installing them. Shout out to my friend Alexandru for calling that out. I really appreciate it, man. After I got everything tightened up, I then moved towards installing the knuckle itself. After realizing how dirty these front knuckles were, I brought out my super clean bottle yet again, sprayed them down, and scrubbed them off. After completing everything on the passenger side of the car, I then moved to the driver's side and repeated the exact same process. With the front suspension now installed, I decided I needed to get this door off of my floor and onto the car. So one of the things I wanted to do was cut away the inner door skin. The reason for this is because I plan to actually do the NASCAR door bars whenever I have a roll cage installed in the chassis. And this will actually go into the door itself to help give more room for a seat inside of the car. I then masked off the areas in which I wanted to cut. I tried to pay attention to the parts of the door that I wanted to keep, mostly the upper part of the skeleton, so that way I can build a door card to close the massive opening that's now going to be visible in this door. Once I got most of the interior door card cut off, I then removed the interior wire clips that were holding on the wiring harness that runs inside the door itself. I finished off by removing a couple of brackets that were still attached to the door skin, and then I was finally able to remove the door skin itself with a little bit of massaging. With the interior door skin removed, I took this opportunity to fully clean the inside of the door itself and just make it a little bit more visible while it's going to be exposed inside the car. I then broke out the trusty angle grinder one last time to finish off the rough edges so that way I don't cut my hands when operating this door. And as you can see, it looks pretty clean, installed on the S2000. Don't worry, it's not going to stay red. We'll match it with the rest of the car. But hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Make sure to subscribe. I'll see you guys next time. There's a lot more coming, I promise. Peace!